Good evening, St. Lucia, and thank you for joining us for another episode of What's Happening Now with Laura. Well, St. Lucia, I can tell you, I can safely say that I had a really emotional weekend. Those of you who've been following What's Happening Now with Laura, and even before What's Happening Now with Laura, when I temporarily held on Newsmaker Live, you would note that one of my pet peeves, or should I say, not necessarily a pet peeve, because a pet peeve makes it seem like, oh, it's just a trivial thing. But for me, it's more than a trivial thing. For me, it's a serious thing. It's something that needs much ventilating. It's something that I've dedicated a huge part of my life to advocating against. And I think every St. Lucian, every woman, every female child, but more especially our male counterparts, need to band together to ensure that we stamp out that scourge called rape from our society. I think if we can do our small part in our small island, as Rick would say, on this rock of sages, that we would be able to start a ripple that can manifest and spread outward and perhaps touch the wider world. But if we try to do our best on this small island of ours, if we can try to mitigate, if we can try to stamp out that scourge, I think it would go a long way toward the standard of living that we have in St. Lucia. So over the weekend, and most of you would understand where I'm coming from, and you would have already been down that path with me. So over the weekend, on Saturday morning, I literally woke up to the news of a 105-year-old woman who had been, I am so tempted to say molested, because I think at 105, there are certain words that I think, just out of respect, it's the way I was raised, so bear with me, certain words that you don't use in certain company. And so I'm so tempted to say molested. But that would be hypocritical of me to say molested, because I constantly say, call it by its name, as despicable, as dirty, as malevolent as it sounds. We have to call it by its name. By calling it by its name, this is the only way we can begin to open up the discussion, to broaden our minds, to change the dialogue, to change the narration. I'm talking about rape. So I literally woke up on Saturday morning to my phone buzzing. And when I picked it up, the message was that a 105-year-old woman who just celebrated her 105th birthday not too long ago had been allegedly raped by an assailant, and that there was a further attempt to rape on another person. I want to think, because at the time I thought it was by the same individual, although subsequent reports haven't mentioned that alleged attempt rape, and it's mainly focused on the 105-year-old great-grandmother who had been raped and sodomized. And those are the reports that we're getting. So I literally woke up to that, and I felt literally my skin crawl. Just imagine you're in your bed, in the comfort and the warmth of your bed, under your covers, your phone rings, you pick it up, and this is the message that you're getting. Perhaps after having some warm, fuzzy dream, and waking up to another day, being grateful for life, being grateful that you woke up the same way you went to bed, that you're safe and ensconced in your room under your covers. And you know that when you step out your door, you'll be surrounded by a loving family. So I woke up to that and I was just appalled. Can you imagine what kind of miscreant, what kind of animal, what kind of excrement would look at a 105-year-old woman and say, you know what? I'm going to dominate you today. I am going to violate you in the worst way possible because that is going to make my day. Because by doing that, I am going to be Yokozuna. I'm going to be this all-powerful male predator. I am going to feel so good about myself. I am going to dominate you today. Because we know that rape is not about sex. We know that rape is not about passion. Maybe passion in a different way. A passion to dominate. A passion to control. That's what rape is about. Rape is not about sex. It's not about a fetish. It's about dominating. It's about controlling. And that message was accompanied by a picture of a young man, strapping, muscle-bound man. And a little later on, from another window, I got a picture of, a video rather, of the 105-year-old great-grandma who had been raped and sodomized. Now, I want to say that there is a reason why we protect the victim and we do not circulate pictures or videos of the victim. We need to protect the victim at all costs. So when I received the video and I saw this charming woman who at 105 could do a lot more, who's a lot more active than some 60-year-olds, than some 30-year-olds, whose obvious joie de vivre was prevalent in her dance. And you could tell that she was well loved in her community. Her entire community was celebrating her birthday with her. And that, I don't even want to sully her memory. And I don't even want to sully who she is and belittle who she is by saying frail. Because she didn't look frail at all. She looked energetic. She looked, if someone were to tell me to guess, or were to ask me to guess her age, I would never have said 100, much less 105. I would not have even said 90, much less 100. And to think that that woman was raped in her sanctuary, in her castle, in her boudoir, in her bedroom, in her night clothes, is just as despicable as you can get. And later on, further reports confirming that the assailant was known to her and that she had been nothing but good to that person. And that person was like a son to her. And that this is how he repaid her kindness over the years, where she cared for him, clothed him, and fed him, and took care of him like one of her own. It really says something about who we are as a people, that somebody could take care of us and love us even when they did not have to, and that we repay that kindness with such a dastardly act. It brings to mind the saying that no good deed goes unpunished. And I was so livid and so furious at this excuse for a human being for doing that to anybody, much less a 105-year-old woman who had survived the test of time, and that you would do that to her. I personally was off with his head. At that point, I didn't want to be reminded of humanity. I didn't want to be reminded of my Christianity. I didn't want to be reminded of the sum total of who I am. All I imagined was that could have been my grandmother, my great-grandmother. My grandmother died pretty young. My grandmother died in her 60s, but my great-grandmother, she died on my birthday when I was 12 years old. She died at age 88. When you think of 105, that's a far cry from my great-grandmother was young compared to this woman when she died. And at 88, that's having lived a good, ripe old age. And I just imagined that could have been my great-grandmother. And I just could not bear it. I just wanted that son of a gun to suffer the way that poor woman must have suffered while he violated her body, while he violated her home, her sanctuary, her mind, her very soul. And at that point, I wanted his head on a silver platter. Or any platter would do. Didn't have to be silver, didn't have to be precious metal. I just wanted him gone. I wanted him eliminated. I wanted him gone, erased from the face of the earth. Because you don't do that to someone. You don't do that. Certain things should be held sacred. There should be some sort of humanity left in you to stop you, to say, no, not this time, not this. Not this. And I remember somebody saying, well, he didn't break and enter into the house. She opened up for him because she knew him. It doesn't really matter. These little details, I sometimes wonder where we come off. These little details don't matter. When you've committed a crime, you violated somebody, however you access that person doesn't really matter. What matters is that you violated that person's trust. And it makes your crime even more heinous when that person trusts you and willingly opens their home and themselves to you. So that just made my feelings even worse. I just could not bear it. And by the time I really came to grasps with what was happening, there was the follow-up news. That thing had been shot and killed by police. Let's hear in the words of the victim's grandson what happened.
Phone call around 4:30 a.m. Saturday when they were notified that the grandmother was attacked by a male individual. Upon arrival on the scene, the victim was already transported to the Victoria Hospital to be assessed and treated.
I asked her what happened, and she told me, well, the guy pulled her from the bed, hold her neck, block her mouth, and start molesting her from behind and in front. And so right now the pain she have is her back that hurting her and her waist. But she told me, well, she cannot use her bowels at the time because all her backside is hurting her.
The woman who recently celebrated her 105th birthday has been a resident in the community for over 50 years. Relatives were surprised when they realized the perpetrator was well known to them and the victim.
She's doing everything at the age of 105. She's been washing, cleaning, cooking, doing everything on her own. But people pass in and see her, they come in and visit her all the time, but she sleeps at her own. And that same guy, when he was small, he used to come by my granny giving him food, everything. And that is the result. He paid my grandmother of respect. That's what he did to my granny.
The incident has left the family devastated. While she was discharged from the hospital on the same day of the attack, The elderly lady returned to hospital earlier today for a follow-up and checkup.
And now that she's scared of her own home, so the house come to her like a nightmare to her. So
Miguel Edward was shot and killed by police on Saturday, November 2nd, after attempting to reach towards his waistline when he was approached by police. According to reports, Edward was attempting to flee the island via boat before he was killed. For the DBS News World, I am Sheffield Gillard.
And so we've heard that, just as I said, that he was somebody known to the victim and that she fed him as a youngster and cared for him. I just can't imagine what the family must be going through, knowing that this was an individual that was welcomed into the victim's home and by extension their home. What struck me in the police report is that Miguel Edward, who is the perpetrator and who was subsequently killed by the police, and listen to the name, Mad Max. That tells you, that's his nickname, his moniker. That tells you, gives you some sort of insight into the person's whole psyche, Mad Max. Like you're just so mad, you're just doing anything, right? You're just doing anything. You just don't care and you can just do anything. And he just did anything. So you've committed your crime. You know that you've committed your crime. You know that it's wrong. You're trying to flee. And I hope that there is a proper investigation and that the killing was lawful and that it was a good killing. And I know that sounds like an oxymoron, a good killing, but you know what I mean, and that it could not have been avoided. And you're presenting yourself, even further presenting yourself as a menace, or so we've been told by police reports, to the police officers who are trying to apprehend you after committing such a heinous crime. And the police said that Edward, that's Miguel Edward, was a menace and had been in and out of jail on several occasions. He was a menace. He had been in and out of jail on a number of occasions. And I know that there are some of us out there who would be saying that despite everything, despite what he had done, that he was a human being and that he needed to have his day in court and face justice and face the penalties of what he had done. And for the most part, I agree. If you can apprehend the perpetrator, if you can apprehend the criminal safely, posing no risk to yourself and to other bystanders, and bring them in, by all means. But I'm not going to shed a tear over Miguel Edward. I'm not going to shed a tear after what he done. And then as I'm supposing, suppose that they were able to apprehend him and bring him in. He's a menace out there. But guess what? You would think that he would be less of a menace inside. But we know that even in prison, that the prisoners themselves are not safe. The prisoners themselves are not safe from themselves. Just a couple of weeks ago, we were told of a 16-year-old who was violated, raped by 3 men in prison. She's in prison for having committed murder. Yet, while in prison, awaiting her day in court, she is raped by 3 men in prison. So let's just say we add a Mad Max to the whole equation. He could do this out there, where he has to search for a victim? What would this Mad Max do when he has a captive audience, where he has a captive group of people who cannot escape, who cannot leave, who cannot run away? What would he do inside there? Are we equipped at Bordelais for Mad Maxes? Are we? So the morning, I'm telling you, Saturday was just a discombobulating day for me. So I woke up with that news, and by the time it was lunchtime, I had heard that he had been shot and killed because he had posed a menace to the police while they were trying to apprehend him, while he was trying to flee to Martinique, and that, he was dead. He was killed. I will not repeat what I said using the words of, I think now, the most infamous president that the United States of America has ever had. I used his words to describe what had happened to Mad Max. And I will not repeat that because, you just don't repeat certain things in polite company. But if you recall last week, what this president had said about Baghdadi, you will get a gist of what went down. So while I'm reeling from that and I'm like, okay, breathing a sigh of relief that at least he's no longer on the prowl looking for victims, whether here on our shores or out off our shores, that the female population is safe from this predator. There we hear another attempted rape of a woman on a lonely stretch of road while trying to avoid potholes. Let's take a listen to what happened.
That a female teacher slowed down to escape some potholes along the better stretch of road when a predator pounced on the opportunity, attempting to enter the vehicle to rape the female driver. This incident has prompted Superintendent Minister in the Methodist Church, St. Ampadu, to call on female drivers to take precautionary measures to protect themselves while driving. This includes locking all doors, especially in secluded areas.
Now, when that news broke, I was like, oh my gosh, not another one. And then when I heard that the superintendent minister had issued words of caution to female drivers and female motorists and just women in general, I was like, okay, very well. Let's see where that's going. Let's listen to the rest of the clip and then we'll discuss.
I want to also say that women should also be very careful, especially where their movement. When you are in your vehicle, try to lock it. And again, the type of dress that you put out, going out, we need to check all these things in order not to open ourselves up for people to invade into our lives. So I think especially going to Christmas time, a lot of crime and activities take place. And that is where we need to be very careful about our movement and other things. When you are in your vehicle, I think the best thing to do is to just lock it, especially at night and obscure places.
Generally.
Did you hear that? He started off well. When you're driving alone, take precaution. You're driving alone. It's a lonely stretch of road. You're the only one. Lock your doors. Secure yourself. I mean, gas is expensive and you probably want to keep your carbon footprint low, so you're trying not to burn too much AC, but you're alone. So this is a precautionary measure. Lock your windows, raise your windows, lock your doors, maybe put on the AC because it's going to be a little hot in there, and proceed with caution. Not a problem. I quite agree. I 100% with the minister. But then he goes on about your mode of dress. You're in your car. You're going about your business. This idiot jumps out of the bushes wherever, walking, doing whatever, accosts you while you stop to allow him to cross the road. And the minister has the gall to say that your mode of dress is what tempted that idiot? Tell me something. How did the idiot see what her dress was? How? This is what really burns me. It really takes my blood to a boil. I remember, and and this is not just inherent to, although I might want to be a little I might come across sounding a little prejudiced, but I tend to find a lot of that talk, especially when it comes from the men of the cloth, from a certain geographical area. And I'll explain why. So and it has nothing to do with denomination or religion, but I think it's a cultural thing. It's a mindset. I think it is something that is inherent to that particular geographical location. Now, I'm not saying that it is not pervasive or it has not intruded elsewhere, or that it does not still pervade or remain elsewhere. But generally, from my perspective, from my point of view, whenever I have come across these groupings of people, that is often the case, the type of things they said. So I remember attending mass somewhere in this, outside of my own parish. And there was this Nigerian priest, and he was talking about rape. And that was the year that we had almost every week, we had at least 2 rapes. And so he was talking about rapes, and he was cautioning, and he was giving advice. And I was like, okay, I like where this is going. And then he jumped on the clothing, and he was saying that it's the women's fault. It's the clothes that they wear and the things that they do and their attitude and and how they're loose and promiscuous and all of that, and how they jump on the bikes and cock up their behinds and with the short shorts and with their butt cheeks hanging, and that's what's causing them to be raped. That very same week, a 101-year-old woman had been raped and sodomized, just like the 105-year-old woman this past Saturday, in her home in Monrepo. Just as this last case, she was raped and sodomized in her home. And here was this. I want to be respectful, so I'm going to say this priest with this idiotic mindset, saying that it is women's fault. Yet the statistics does not support his view, because up till then, the majority of rapes that occurred in St. Lucia, at least in St. Lucia, had been done to the vulnerable, older grandmothers, younger children in their homes while they were socializing, while they were sleeping. In the 90s, what, pray tell, a 105-year-old woman would be wearing to bed? What lingerie would she be wearing to bed? That's what I want to know. I really wish I could have a conversation with this minister to ask him, just give us an idea as to what do you think that 105-year-old woman was wearing to bed that could possibly tempt anybody. What do you think she was wearing to bed? Because when you say your mode of dress and the way you wear, what you wear, and you're implying that every woman who has been raped was asking for it. That she provoked her attacker to rape her. Just the same way that this other priest was castigating women, young women, and he focused in on young women as if only young women were raped and only women who dressed provocatively, although the statistics proved otherwise. We had 2 young ladies, 2 young teenagers in their home, full of life, full of vigor, excited to be striking out on their own, studying for a future down the road. And their home was violated, and they were violated. Their person was violated in the worst way. One of them, which was so badly mauled and mutilated, she needed to have surgery to sort of put her back together, because I say sort of because you cannot, when your soul has been ripped and you've been so violated, you're dead. The person you once were, the person you were 5 seconds before the attack is gone. And these are the shepherds that we have who are telling us that we're asking for it. That our attire invites men to want to attack. Even though they say, as a caveat on the backside, on the flip side, that does not give a man a right. But you tacitly telling the men, you understand why they are doing what they're doing, because we are asking for it. We're putting ourselves out there on display. Who does that? I don't get it. I don't understand. All of the literature is there. Do some reading. Open a book, a magazine even, a newspaper, or better yet, Mr. Google is there to offer you some insight. All the statistics are right there at the click of a button. A touch of the screen. That's all you have to do. Just Google it. But no, we rather stay with this archaic mindset that the women are asking for it. I will pause here because we're due for a break. But when we come back, we will take a look at what exactly is the rape culture, and why when men and some women, I'm not excusing women, because there are some women who will actually literally say that. So there are women who are as big culprits as the men. To talk a little bit about the rape culture when we come back. Don't touch that dial. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. into what's happening now with Laura, um, every time I do from the very first day I did a rape show, I've been getting certain feedback. I mean, the very first rape show that I did, a woman nonetheless called and asked me, why am I so passionate about rape? Is it because I had been raped myself? And not to go into how I felt when this person said that, I actually felt very violated, and I felt very disgusted, and I felt pity. Well, not pity, but I put myself in the shoes of those other women, those women who had been raped and violated sexually, and said, wow, if you as a woman had not been violated sexually or raped, then does that mean you cannot be an advocate for women who had been raped or sexually assaulted? But and every time I've done a rape show, I get some sort of feedback. So while on break, I got a message, and the question was, are you a sex expert? That's going deep. And I want to tell the person, I am not a sex expert. I think being an expert in a field simply tells you all what you do not know. It highlights, it underscores a lot of what you don't know. It underscores the need to know more, to delve more. And an end result of delving and getting to know more and reading about more and educating yourself more on a topic, there's the need to educate and to share that knowledge, to share that information that you've gleaned, that you've learned. Because if you have not shared it, if you keep it for yourself, then what good is it? And so while I don't consider myself a sex expert, I am a co-founder of an NGO called Caring Hands Foundation, the mandate of which is to look after vulnerable and marginalized children. And we cannot do that. We cannot understand where they're coming from, why they are, who they are, if we don't look at their backstory. And oftentimes in their backstory, we learn about their own parents and their backstories. And a lot of the times when we do the work, we find out about the rape cases. We find out about the generational rape that happened. So the child has been raped, molested, and the mother or the father or somebody closely related to that child had been violated and molested and raped themselves. And so they're using that experience to raise that child dysfunctionally sometimes. And so through the training that we get as part of that particular NGO, because we do a lot of training, we educate ourselves, we do courses, we get to know things. That's how we learn, that's how we grow. And so as I said earlier, if I've learned something and I cannot pass it on, what good has the learning it done for me? You know, what was this the point of learning it? What was the point of getting that knowledge if you can't pass it on? So no, I am not a sex expert, not by far. Because every time I read up, every time I take a course, every time I further educate myself, I only learn another layer and another and another. And my only intention is to highlight, because as an advocate, that's what you can do, highlight and underscore what exists. Not sugarcoat it and baby it and powder it and put rouge on it and say, oh, this is what it is. No. Our duty is to shine the light on it and hopefully try to eliminate that scourge. And that's what I'm doing in my own little way. Yeah? So back to what we're talking about. Because many women who experience sexual violence rarely report or come forward about their incidences, the exact rape number is challenging to report. While many countries have laws against the act of sexual assault and violence, many of them are insufficient, inconsistent, and are not systematically enforced. And so while people mostly hear about rape and sexual assault against women, men around the world also experience sexual harassment, sexual assault, and rape every day. We focus a lot on the women, because the women speak out a lot more. But we know in our society, when I say in our society, I mean here in St. Lucia, extra-regionally, and further afield, men get violated as well. But we cannot even begin to quantify, because the vast majority of men who are molested, raped, sexually or raped don't come forward. So we know that rape is a scourge, not just here on St. Lucia, but worldwide. It would be interesting to note the 10 countries with the highest rates of rape. And when I say the highest rates of rape, we're not talking about the exact number, but the number of incidents per 100,000 citizens. And they are in order. South Africa, 132.4. Botswana, 92.9. Lesotho, 82.7. Swaziland, 77.5. Bermuda, 67.3. Sweden, 63.5. Suriname, 45.2. Costa Rica, 36.7. Nicaragua, 31.6. Grenada, 30.6. That's the top 10 countries that that has been documented as having the highest rates of rape per 100,000 citizens. Shocking. But it gives us an insight as to why certain people have a certain mind thought when speaking or dealing with rape. And I think that really dictates and that really narrates what the rape culture of a country, of a region is. And what do I mean by rape culture? Well, according to Marshall University, rape culture is an environment, and Marshall University has a women's center, so kudos to them. And I think a lot of universities need to have that. If they don't already have it, they need to have it. They need to institute, because it's becoming a growing problem on campuses where women are raped, young women, girls are raped. And at that point, you're really just discovering yourself. And a lot of the times you leave home and you go and you're so full of life and expectation, and your eyes are doughy-eyed, and you're looking at everything through rose-tinted glasses, and you're not really fully equipped to deal with certain things. So when things like that happen, when you're raped on campus, it's really mind-boggling, and it can really set a person back. So I'm an advocate for those sorts of women's center where you can deal with those sorts of issues. So anyway, they describe rape culture as an environment in which rape is prevalent and in which sexual violence against women is normalized and excused in the media and popular culture. Rape culture is perpetuated through the use of misogynistic language, the objectification of women's bodies, and the glamorization of sexual violence, thereby creating a society that disregards women's rights and safety. Rape culture affects every woman. When one woman is raped, every woman is raped. The rape of one woman is a degradation, terror, and limitation to all women. Most women and girls limit their behavior because of the existence of rape. Most women and girls live in fear of rape. Men, in general, do not. That's how rape functions as a powerful means by which the whole female population is held in a subordinate position to the whole male population. Even though many men don't rape and many women are never victims of rape, the cycle of fear is the legacy of rape culture. This cycle of fear, even though you had never been raped, and even though most men never rape, but the cycle of fear is the legacy of the rape culture. What exactly is the rape culture? What examples of rape culture can we get to say, okay, I can identify this is rape culture, and I'm going to try to change my behavior, my actions, to not fall in that category? Because I happen to think that persons who perpetuate the rape culture is just as bad as the rapists themselves, because they create a cocoon, they create an incubator that protects those rapists because it's pervasive in our culture, so it's not that bad, one or two people may talk, but it's not that bad because generally it's accepted. So examples of rape culture: blaming the victim. She asked for it. Like the superintendent minister was trying to allude. No, she didn't ask for it. She could have been butt naked in her car. She didn't ask for it. And no man looks at a butt naked woman. And I mean, we see them all the time. These women, they're sometimes mental, sometimes they're just trying to make a statement. They're not attacked. They're not mauled. Oftentimes, the statistics supports women who are not asking for it are the ones who are raped. The grannies, like the 105-year-old woman, the 101-year-old woman in a previous case, the two young schoolgirls who were raped in their home, the two young girls who were raped in the park, the woman who was molested, assaulted while going for a jog, and the list goes on and on. Trivializing sexual assault. Boys will be boys. Men, that's how they're built. They'll see a naked woman, they'll see a sexy woman, and they'll want her. And she, and they'll feel entitled. By trivializing it, we're encouraging the rape culture. Sexually explicit jokes. We do, oh my gosh, especially in the Caribbean, we are notorious for our sexually explicit jokes. That is perpetuating the rape culture. Tolerance of sexual harassment. Sometimes we bandy it around, oh, that's sexual harassment. But when sexual harassment really takes place, the person who the sexual harassment is directed at is not the only person who identifies that it's sexual harassment. Sometimes the person, so if there are three of us in a group and there's a guy and he's sexually harassing this other girl or whatever, and it's not directed at me, but as long as I feel uncomfortable and I feel violated, I can say, okay, this is sexual harassment. I don't have to tolerate it or condone it. I can say, no, you can't talk to her like that. Support her. And vice versa, if it's a man, if it's a woman, a female, doing it to a man, support him. We can't tacitly endorse sexual harassment and say, well, I never indulge in it. But by not saying anything, by not stamping or standing up and saying, no, you can't do that. That's wrong. By not chastising our friends when they do it, we're tacitly endorsing it. We're saying it's okay. That is a part of the rape culture. Inflating false rape report statistics. Publicly scrutinizing a victim's dress, mental state, motives, and history. And I spoke about that a little earlier, not too long ago. I mean, and it's not just this one incident. We've had a number of incidents. Young girls, under the age of 16, 12 years, 13 years, 9 years old. They're raped and they say, depuis jeune, et jaconet nom. We make those statements. We're perpetuating the rape culture. That's not right. No woman or child or man or boy is asking to be raped. We need to respect everybody's rights to dress how they want, to speak how they want. We can talk with them about it. We can say, I don't think that's appropriate language for a 9-year-old or a 12-year-old or for a 30-year-old to a 9-year-old. But however a minor acts or however an adult acts, it does not give us license to speak to them in any way sexually explicit or to even violate their personal, their private space. Gratuitous gendered violence in movies and television. We see it all the time. Out of the blue, nowhere. It doesn't need to be there, but it's there. There's this scene where a woman is being raped or forcefully taken advantage of. We need to, in our own little way, stamp these things out. Defining manhood as dominant and sexually aggressive. Well, that's a man. If you're a man and you're not aggressively pursuing a woman sexually, you're not a man. And we call them pansies and all kinds of names, derogatory names. We call them all sorts of things. That is perpetuating the rape culture. Just because a man is not aggressive sexually does not mean that he's not a man. And by enforcing that, we're saying it's okay, because the next step thereafter is domination, rape. Defining womanhood as submissive and sexually passive. That is a whole other show by itself. Because I remember one time I did a show on whether a husband can rape a wife if a wife is, not up to it, or she's having her period, or she's, they're having a tiff, they're separated or still married, but not in communion with each other. And he's, oh, that's my wife, I can have sex with her whenever I want and rape her. And you would be surprised at the number of callers who called and said, oh, no, a husband cannot rape a wife. We need to stop that, as if a woman should always be ready for when her husband or when her boyfriend wants it. Doesn't work that way. Pressure on men to score. Oh, yes. I mean, it's like a rite of passage where boys are expected to, score by the time they're 12. What's your first conquest? We have boys at the age of 9 being sexually experienced. Pressure on women not to appear cold. So if you're reserved and you're conservative, then you're a cold fish. Then you're supposed to be this haughty. And yet, when you're the haughty, they degrade you. They denigrate you. So it's like, where does it end? Where does it start? Where does it end? It's a thin line. And all of that, either side of it is perpetuating the rape culture. Assuming that men don't get raped, or that only weak men get raped, could not be a greater falsehood. It could not be a greater perpetuation of the rape culture, because we're assuming that just because it's a man, and again, we talked about the sexually aggressive man, the man who has to score and that he's always on top, literally and figuratively. We're saying that perpetuates the rape culture, and that is one of the reasons men don't talk, because we belittle them. If a man were to say, oh, a woman raped me, or if a man raped me, we have the number of expletives that we use to describe that person for saying that a guy raped them or that a woman raped them. And so then these men just close themselves off and just don't report it. And then we wonder why we cannot quantify the number of men who have been raped. Refusing to take rape accusations seriously. So when a person comes up and goes to the police or goes to a family member and says, I have been raped, and because that person's lifestyle previously was one of a promiscuous nature, then you belittle them. Like it's only pious women and children who can be raped. No. Anybody can be raped. And we have to take every case, every accusation of rape seriously. Teaching women to avoid getting raped instead of teaching men not to rape. And we do that all the time. And classic example of what I discussed, the clip earlier. We tell our women how not to get raped. But the only way to prevent rape is if men don't rape. So if the men don't rape, then our women don't have any need to protect themselves from being raped. So we need to teach our men not to rape, rather than, or in tandem with teaching our women how to avoid getting raped. Right? So how can men and women combat the rape culture? Avoid using language that objectifies and degrades women or men. Speak out if you hear someone else making an offensive joke or trivializing rape. If a friend says she has been raped, take her seriously and be supportive. Likewise, a male. Think critically about the media's messages about women, men relationships, and violence. Be respectful of others' physical space, even in casual situations. Because sometimes you're having fun. Have you ever had that experience where you're out clubbing or you're out having drinks with a group of friends? Not everybody has that the same degree of closeness. And then out of the blue, it seems that just somebody is just invading your space and all of a sudden making, lewd advances to you, and you're like, okay, we're all supposed to be friends here. I'm not looking for a hookup. We need to be respectful of each other's space. Always communicate with sexual partners and do not assume consent. Do not assume consent. And I think it's just the sexiest thing when a guy asks a woman, are you sure? Are you ready for this? Especially in the beginning of the relationship, where you're not yet intimate, but you're leaning that way, all the signs are going that direction. And then he asks you, are you ready for this? I mean, what's more chivalrous than that? Like, he's asking you about your well-being. He's not just putting his needs first. He's concerned about you. And I think every woman and man should demand that. It should not be, a one-off thing. It should not be an exception. It should be the norm. Define your own manhood or womanhood. Do not let stereotypes shape your actions. So if you want to be the wild and short skirt, tight tops, crop tops, men's shirts, booty shorts type of person, let that be who you are, because this is who you're comfortable with. Do not let society dictate, because of your background, this is what you need to be wearing. If this is what you feel comfortable with, wear it, own it, but be prepared to stand your ground. So if this is what you're wearing, don't think that, okay, because this is what I chose to when I got raped, well, it's somehow my fault. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. Get involved, join a community, join a group, whether it's at school, whether it's in the community, and work towards ending violence against women and men. And I always want to tack that on, although a lot of the cases, it's so easy for us to forget the men or relegate the men to the background because, it's so far and few in between that we get those cases. But it's important to remember, because societies, communities, homes, families, they constitute both men and women. This is how children are born. Children are not, they don't just come from the sky or a stork brings them. It's a man and a woman coming together that creates children, and so creates families and communities and nations. So we cannot forget one at the expense of the other. So we'll take another quick break, and when we come back, we'll carry on the conversation a little further on, and try to delve into why is we have such a dysfunctional relationship with sex. Stay tuned. Thank you for staying tuned and thank you for coming back to what's happening now with Laura. As we talk about sex and we talk about rape, the dysfunctional relationship that we have with sex, and how rape can affect that, how rape can affect that this unhealthy relationship that some of us have with sex. We'll now open the lines. The number to call is 451-9788. That's 451-9788. And you can send us your WhatsApp messages on 284-6536. That's 284-6536. Or you can send us an email at laurajepe@gmail.com. Now, I need to remember at the top of the show to, if you're going to send an email to while the show is going on, to send that email, because sometimes the emails come in late and then I only get the emails after the show is done. So I should really remember to do that. But again, as I said, the number to call is 451-9788 and the WhatsApp platform is 284-6536. And you can also send us your emails at laurajepe@gmail.com. And at this point, I want to talk about a couple of rape cases that are near and dear to me, because it really, from a very young age, it really shaped my philosophy and started me off on that path of advocacy against rape, particularly of women and girls, because those were my first experiences. Later on in life, I got exposed to men and boys, but early on, I was exposed to rape of women and girls. We have our first call online. Thank you for calling. You're on the air.
Good evening, Laura.
Good evening.
What I have to say tonight, you see, this culprit was a nuisance to society. I mean, this lady has been there for all those years, living alone, doing all her business by herself. Especially me, when I go down the road in the mornings, unless I see this lady, I'm not happy. I must call her at home and must give her before I go down the road. This same man raped a sheep the same night. I don't know if it's before or after. The man screw a sheep, and the sheep is down the road. The sheep cannot walk. Take the sheep to the vet. The sheep just lying down there. I mean, I don't know if we in the community had meet that guy before the police. I don't know what could have happened to him. Because this is a lady I look up to very, very, very high. Okay? And every single person in the community look up to her and respect her. I mean, she is right now at her grandchildren in Labon. And it hurts me here today. I cannot see her on a daily basis. I mean, I know all her friends who come to visit her in Grand Riviere will not be able to go to Labon to see her. People sit and talk to her in the balcony. Mm-hmm. I mean, she has visitors like on a daily basis as the day goes. But what I'm happy about the most, this culprit did not kill the lady. That's what I'm most happy about. Mm-hmm. Okay? Mm-hmm. But this is in a better way. The area is safe now. The area is very safe. Wow. People don't have to be looking over their shoulders because that culprit is out. Okay?
Yes.
Good night.
Thank you so much for calling and for sharing that with us. And this is the exact same thing. I mean, I am thankful and grateful that this lady survived. I mean, she must be in a lot of pain because, as we heard in the clip at the top of the show, I mean, she's in a lot of pain and she had to go back to the hospital because she couldn't ease her bowels properly. And now we're hearing that not only was this guy a rapist of the elderly, but he also practiced bestiality. I mean, how do you
It's true animals. The last time he knocked out a man with a piece of stick and he bullied him.
Oh my God. So this guy has had no, there was no, he didn't differentiate whether you're woman, man, or beast or animal. I mean,
The man
he was
is a
an equal
beast.
opportunist.
The man is a beast.
Wow.
The man take a piece of stick, he knock on the man and he bull him.
Wow.
So this man was a nuisance to society.
Wow.
So right now he's in a better place. I don't feel sorry for him.
I am the one thing I am very grateful for is that the police dealt with him, however that happened, however that came about, and that there was no case of vigilante justice, because if a community who feels so strongly as the community of Grand Riviere felt about this lady were to lay their hands on, I mean, I know what communities do to thieves, people who just break into people's homes, but much less, you know, commit a crime against humanity like that. I could well imagine what the vigilante justice would have been that they would have meted out to him. So I'm happy that the community did not get a hold of him and that he was dealt with the law and let the law figure out what happened and whether it was a justified killing. I think that's a better word than I used earlier when I said it was a good killing, but a justified killing. So
It would have been a different scenario.
it would have been absolutely a different scenario. So I'm that's one of the things that I'm grateful for. And I just hope that
I don't even think they should investigate that.
Well, I think there's a precedent that needs to be set. I think regardless
I
of what,
I understand that.
But I know the feeling.
That.
I understand the feeling.
I understand that, but I don't even think there should be any inquest or any investigation.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway,
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for calling. Wow. And there you have it, a neighbor, you know, relating how he feels about that menace that has been erased and what he did before he was erased. And before we got that first call, I wanted to share with you a case where when I first got exposed to rape, I must have been around 9 years old. And at that time, I didn't really understand what rape was because I lived a very sheltered life. My parents ensured that all of us were protected and that, I mean, even in movies, we weren't allowed to watch any movies that our parents had not watched. So let me tell you, you know, back in the day, there was the VCR, and our VCR got a lot of work because we watched movies not on television. We watched movies on video cassette, and the movies that we watched had to be previewed by our parents first. So we were not exposed to a lot of sexual content. We have another call?
Hello?
Hi, good evening. You're on the air. Thank you for calling.
Laura?
Yes?
Good afternoon. Good evening.
Good evening.
And how are you?
I'm not too bad, thanks.
You look so cute tonight.
Thank you.
Now, let me say something to you.
Mm-hmm.
That man who raped the 105-year-old woman, in my opinion, he should not be shot. And I'll tell you why. Mm-hmm. The reason for that is that man should be in jail for a long, long time, never to be let out again. And for his punishment, his head should be put into a toilet bowl every morning with excreta in it, and let 4 prisoners hold him tight and duck his head into a toilet bowl every day of his life until he dies. They should not shoot him. And others would take precaution if they have to rape again. That is the punishment they need to do with these people. And you'll see it's not going to stop. If they ever try this one, it will stop. Put his head down into a toilet bowl full of shit, and you'll see what happens. They will never rape again. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that with us. And that's the thing. I think when these things happen, it really brings out our creativity and what we would like to mete out to these perpetrators, because it really, it's mind-boggling that a person would do that. And all the time I say we have to look into the backstory. And this person got love. We know that this person got love because, you know, that the person that he did that to, the woman that he did that to, took care of him, fed him. He was in and out of her home. The community knew him. And to do that, I mean, it speaks to the mindset. And we have to understand what creates these monsters who live amongst us. So back to my first experience with rape. First exposure rather with rape. That person actually happened to be a relative of mine, and I remember we were going to school, And then that person was missing for a week or two. And I wondered what had happened to her. And then that word came up, rape. And I didn't know what it was. I didn't understand what it was. So in my mind, like, as with any, you ask questions, back then you have a curious mind, you ask questions, you shut down, you move along onto the next big thing that impacts your life. And so I moved on from that and never gave it another thought until I was an adult. And then all of a sudden, I revisited that episode, that moment when that relative of mine had been raped. And it made sense, every single action of hers since then. So she never really performed in school. She was always wanted to be with the boys, and really not so much the girls. And just her whole lifestyle thereafter, she became an alcoholic, very promiscuous, and just in general, not having a very high self-esteem, having very low confidence, expecting to be given things, having a sense of entitlement, not really wanting to work for things, being very lethargic, but at the same time hurting and always seeming to be looking for something and not really getting that something, and being abused even further as an adult. And then it's like, after you've done the training and after you've done the workshops, and then you go, oh, you click one to the other, and you said, oh, there's the dysfunctional behavior. This is where it's coming from. This is what's happening. And by then, it's too late. Oh, for me, it was too late, because then she died very young, I consider at a young age. And it was like, oh my God, this is supposed to be the prime of your life. This is when you're supposed to be enjoying life. This is when you're supposed to be having your children and having a meaningful relationship with a significant other, whether it's, and really fulfilling your purpose of being here on earth. And that's just snuffed out because nobody cares. Even the persons that you think your drinking buddies, you think are there for you, it's on to the next when you're no longer available to have that next drink with, to share that next sexual liaison with. It's like, okay, well, you're gone, and that's it. And the other one that really impacted me is another classmate. But at the time when she was going through her ordeal, we didn't know. We only found out when we were adults, and she came out and said, enough is enough. I've had enough of this. This elephant is weighing on me. It's crushing my chest. It's crushing my spirit. It's crushing who I can be. I need to let it out. And she let it out in the most public way. And I remember watching her story because it was on telly that she came out on the Oprah Winfrey Show, and I was shocked. I was like, oh my gosh, I know this person. This person was my friend at school, and this was what this person was going through at the time, and we never knew. And I literally felt violated. I felt that this was happening to me. I felt like I could have been a better friend. I felt as if I contributed towards that aspect of her life. I felt that I could have done a lot more to comfort her and to assure her that not everybody is a pig. Not everybody means to hurt you. And I remember at school that this person was bullied, and that person was jeered at, and that person was made fun of because she was a little bit different. And when she came out with her story, all of that came rushing back, and it's like, oh my gosh, whilst you were not participatory, you didn't participate in the bullying, and you didn't participate in the outcast, ensuring that she was an outcast, because you always were her friend, and she was always your friend, and you were close and all of that. It hurts that you were so self-absorbed that you were not able to see that your friend was hurting, and that you could have gone that extra mile to help her and to ensure that she knew that there were genuine friends, that there were people out there who cared, you know, and that she could not go to her own family and to tell them this is what's happening to me, and having to live all of these years, going through school, all of these years with that on your chest, becoming an adult, moving, leaving your country, going out, striking out on your own in a new land, and then, and only then, being able to open up about something like that. Let me tell you, that was profound for me. I will never forget it. And I will never be able to just say, oh, it's okay to make fun of, it's okay to not be empathetic or sympathize with a victim. And I use that word victim very, very loosely, because I think every woman, man or child, whether it's female or male, who has gone through that, whether it's mere, and I say mere, and I use that word very loosely because nothing about sexual assault is mere. Whether it's sexual harassment, whether it's inappropriate touching, whether it's inappropriate language, inappropriate behavior, or as far as rape, nobody deserves to go through that. And we should all be ambassadors. We should all be advocates against that kind of behavior. Against that kind of behavior. And I have one more thing. And again, the lines are open. The number to call is 451-9788. The WhatsApp platform to use is 284-6536. And we take your messages at laurajeppe@gmail.com. But I want to add one more thing to this conversation, and that is that about statutory rape. And a lot of people think, okay, statutory rape is okay in certain respects because some children they're so advanced, and you know the way they present themselves. Statutory rape is especially heinous because it involves underage children. But I want to flip the script a little bit. It's like looking at something from a mirror on the side, and I want to shift that mirror a little bit, and I want you to look, parents, into that mirror and ask yourselves, do you have a minor that you dress inappropriately? And that's where clothing is important. We have some children, we call them precocious children. And the reason why we call them precocious children is because they have this kind of a disorder where they mature at a young age. So they grow breasts and hips, and they have the figure of an adult. And we dress them as adults. And even though, some of us do it even when those children are not precocious in terms of their body maturing, in terms of the having breasts and whatnot, but we still do because they're cute and we want to dress them like mini-me. And so we wear these halters with the low back and short shorts and short dresses, very sexualized outfits. And we want to dress our little one in the exact same manner. And a lot of the times, these children are overly sexualized. And especially those precocious children, especially these precocious children. So you find you'd have a 12-year-old who looks like a 17-year-old or 18-year-old. That happens. I will never forget my first live face-to-face meeting with a precocious child. I'm telling you, real serious precocious child. I saw that child in an infant school stage 3. In an infant school stage 3. And I asked, why is that child here? Why is that child there? And they said, she's only 7 years old. And my jaw dropped because I thought that child was 12 years old. That child already had breasts. That child already had curves. Where most of her friends, all of her classmates were flat-chested and just not even pubescent, blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? My tongue is tying on this evening. Not even close to being approaching adolescence, that child was already there. And I was shocked. I thought that child was at least Form 1, Form 2 in a secondary school, and that child was only in what we called back then stage 3, which is like, I think, what, grade 2? And today, yeah. So today that child would have been in grade 2. Back then that child was in stage 3. That child was only 7 years old. And I was shocked. When I was growing up, I looked older than my friends. So while my friends were what we call figure 1s, I was already shapely and have curves. But my mother never dressed me as an adult. There was always adult clothing and children's clothing. You're a child, you dress appropriate for your age. You dress appropriate, especially since she knew that I was developing at a faster rate than my friends. And I think parents need to have a look at themselves and ask, am I over-sexualizing my child? Is my child a typical 12-year-old? Can my child be mistaken for a 16-year-old or a 17-year-old? And if that is, critically look at your child. And if that is the case, and I mean, it should never be the case where a parent dresses or allows her child to be dressed as an adult in an overly sexualized manner. Never. But critically look at your child and ask yourself, is that appropriate? Am I buying the right clothing for my child? Because guess what? Men out there, whether they're deliberate predators or inadvertent predators, and I say inadvertent, I'll explain in a little while, they're not always going to ask, how old are you? They're not going to. They're going to look at the package. They're going to look at the way you walk, the way you dress, the way you behave, and they're going to think, oh, that child, that person is moving like a young adult. Fair game. Now, if your child has not been trained or does not know to say, hey, jailbait, I'm only 12. And if that child isn't getting the love and attention that they need at home, or if they're always getting that inappropriate attention at home, they're going to see nothing of it when they go out and they're getting it out there. You understand what I'm saying? There are some children who fall in that category where we have to be extra protective of them. And I know earlier I said we're not supposed to teach our children how not to be preyed upon, but rather teach our boys, the men out there, how not to prey on the women. But there are times where we have to be a little bit extra protective because of nature. We have to do that. We cannot put those body cons on these children with all their little budding shapes and say, oh, it's okay. Because some of them, and I take example from myself, at 12, I did not look like my friends who were 12, who were flat-chested and straight and had no curves. I did not. That was just my makeup, my genetic makeup. So while my friends looked, all of my friends looked a certain way, I looked years older. But I had a good sense of self, and my parents were very protective of me. And so I knew boundaries. But some of our children don't know boundaries because some of our parents do not create those boundaries. Now, on the flip side, gone are the days when you can just assume a person is a certain age by the way they look. Self-preservation should always be at the fore. So you don't just look at a person and say, oh, she looks 17, she looks 18, because I'm guaranteeing you'll be in for a shock. I had that experience when I was 16. An older guy, he was in his 20s, mid-20s to late 20s, thought I was older because I looked older. Thankfully for my mom, who was there while he was making comments and was able to put him on the straight and narrow. Thankfully for him, who was a good boy, a good sort, and realizing his mistake, went, oh my gosh, no, I can't. I cannot. Wow, look how I could have implicated myself here. Right? And so, men, you need to ask yourselves, is what I'm seeing what really is? Self-preservation. Ask a question. How old are you? Even when they come up to you and they throw themselves at you, there could be a backstory there. That child, that person could be looking for love and be looking for attention because they're not getting it at home. Or maybe because they're getting it at home, that inappropriate attention at home, that they think that it's okay, it's the norm, it's fine. Self-preservation. Ask a question. How old are you? And if you're not sure, if you are uncertain, it's just the same way a child, a 16-year-old, 17-year-old will go to the store and ask for cigarettes or ask for liquor. And the store owner, the store attendant needs to ask, how old are you? When you're not certain, you need to ask. And if they say, I'm 18, can I see your ID, please? I don't have ID. What year were you born? If you I know what year I was born. So as immediately you ask me how old I was, what year I was born, I can answer. I don't have to be hemming and hawing for 2 minutes to figure out what year I was born. If you're not sure, it's not worth it. You're preserving yourself, your integrity, the integrity of your store, your establishment. So too should a person. You see this person, you might be interested, maybe they're a little bit more mature than the age, you're not sure, the person or maybe the person is acting a little childish, but the person looks older, ask a question. And if you're still not sure, back off. It's not worth it. The aggravation is not worth it. I know too many men who are languishing in prison right now, who have gone through the system, who are on bail, who are waiting for the day in court because they interfered, and I'm using our local policy here, interfered with an underage child, regardless of how that child presented himself or herself. Self-preservation. Self-preservation, parents, protect and preserve your children. Adults, preserve yourself. Safeguard yourself from this aggravation. And if you aren't sure, stay away. If you are really tempted, do your research just as you would do anything else. It really is not worth it. So I was expecting that. I was waiting for that. Somebody said to me, any info on this girl who was raped at Bodley? I understand that the guys were found that they did the investigation and that they're being dealt with, but that the officers on duty at the time were still being investigated. And so maybe by next week I can have some more info on that. I should really have followed up, but I'll follow up for you next week on that situation. And then the person also said, you said you looked older, but now you look younger. I don't know. It is something that I myself, I'm shocked that I don't understand it. But when I was younger, when I was living in Canada, I never got carded to go anywhere. I always walked with my ID. I couldn't wait to show my ID that I was 18, and they never asked. But when, as an adult, when I go to the clubs, they ask me for ID, and I'm just tickled. Or if I go to buy a lottery ticket, they ask me for my ID because, if they're not sure, you have to ask. I'm tickled by that because they always ask me for my ID. And when I was younger, when I was 18, they never did. So it's one of those things, your age catches up with your physical progress, your physical development. I guess it is. But all jokes aside, it is very important. It is extremely important. I mentor some kids, and when I go out with my girls, I tell them, my teenagers, I tell them, listen, this is what it is. Anybody hassling you, any man hassling you, you don't have to go through any long song and dance. Jailbait. That's all you need to tell them. Jailbait. I'm under 16. And say it loud enough that the persons around them will hear so that they won't hassle you. They won't continue to, want to press the issue because you've already said I'm jailbait, and other people are hearing and they're looking at them funny because nobody likes to be belittled. Nobody likes, everybody has this ego and they always want the ego stroked, not juked. You understand what I'm saying? So preservation. Moms, parents, please, if you have one of these precocious teens, please ensure that you don't dress them in an adult manner. Ensure that even if they want what they want, and that because we have predators out there, you cannot control the behavior of men but you can control your behavior. You can control your child's behavior. Protect your children. Men, protect yourselves. Self-preservation is the name of the game. If you're not sure, stay away. Do your research, do your investigations before you pounce. And that's all the time we have for now. Next week, we'll have another exciting episode of Let's Talk About Sex. And that one is going to be a little bit more educational. And I will have, for those of you asking, I will have an expert. I will have an expert in the field on that one. So stay tuned. Be good to each other. Love each other. Respect each other. And until next week, adieu.